Yes.
One, that's why I was doing that one, like how can sorry, I can't speak English. Specificity of training is applied to resistance.
How would specificity of training apply to the system?
Yeah, how can it be? I was trying to like think.
Okay. Let's start, no space. What is specificity of training?
Working on specific aspects of training.
Be more specific.
Work on steps to create specific applications.
Okay, we're getting close. Nice getting closer. Okay. If you had to rephrase to, I don't know, to your non-HES roommate, what specificity is?
Get better.
Get better at what you do. Very good. Okay. Perfect. Specificity in training means you're going to get better at whatever it is that you do. So, how do we apply that to resistance training?
Work on
That's right. You need to work the muscles and the range of motion and the contraction type and the force level that's going to correspond to whatever goal or gain it is that you want to have. So if your goal is dramatically increase 1 rep max squat, you need to lift heavy doing a squat. You should not go bench press. And that's the idea, right? If I ask you what you guys do from a resistance training standpoint for track, you're going to list off a bunch of things, right? And we can argue about whether those are the right things to do, but in general, there should be some level of specificity to what it is that you're doing. It should be applicable, right?
And vetting that so specific factors.
To the right. But y'all probably aren't doing a huge amount of like shoulders and bicep curls and those kinds of things, right?
Not unless you're a thrower.
Not unless you're a thrower, okay? Specificity. You don't use your upper body a lot, right? Use it some. So that's how we apply specificity. Okay? The biggest thing to do with that is, what does the person want? What do they want to gain? What's your goal? And then you need to train specifically to try to reach that goal. That's how we apply specificity. Okay, great question. Are there others? I know maybe I caught you all off guard, but that's slow.
All the pathway inputs out to the limiting rates. I know that's kind of our homework and kind of also short answer response, but I just didn't want to make sure.
Look at that. Did I give you homework that matched up to a short answer part? That's it. Okay, absolutely we can do that. We can absolutely do that. Okay. I'm sorry for my folks on Zoom. I'm gonna write on the board. Maybe we can take a picture of this and do this. Okay. Someone give me a metabolic pathway.
Creatine phosphate.
Okay. What goes in to the creatine phosphate pathway?
Creatine phosphate and ADP.
Okay, so we start with creatine phosphate. What comes out?
Creatine.
And okay, if we want to do this, we can say this, right? What's the rate limiting step? Creatine kinase. Very good. Okay. Just gonna abbreviate that as CK. Okay. That's the rate limiting step. Very simple, very straightforward. Okay. Good. Everyone frankly writes all of this down. Okay. We'll just do your homework now. And
How specific for you wanting us to be with the Krebs cycle and glycolysis? Many steps are you wanting us to list all of the enzymes, all of the steps for each one?
okay. Anybody remember what I've said multiple times?
No.
No?
Okay.
Well, did I say no, or you don't remember? No, so this is, you don't have to know all of the steps. I want to know what goes in, and I want to know what comes out. That's it. Okay? That's it.
That includes like 80 going in and then 80.
Yes. Yes. Okay, yes. So I'm not, that probably came out snarkier than I intended for it to. Okay, but we'll get there and you'll see exactly, but we don't have to know every little step, every little enzyme. It's just very general. This goes in and this is the thing that comes out. Okay, so we'll walk our way through all of that. Okay, somebody give me another pathway. Doesn't matter which one. Glycolysis. What goes into glycolysis? Glucose. What comes out?
Pyruvate. So.
Well, I guess it depends which way it goes.
Depends which way it goes, right? This way is a little trickier. So. Always interrupting. Always interrupting.
Yeah, but they,
Okay.
last time you described it.
I know. I was at our conference last week and we're at the quiz bowl, which your former fellow students won. Yankee. And they asked that question and they talked about anaerobic glycolysis. Maybe they talked about anaerobic glycolysis and I'm going to scream at the people that wrote the questions. Okay, this is tricky. Okay, this is tricky. What I want you all to know, okay, what I want you to know is for glycolysis, let's know glucose, okay, and that we're going to get pyruvate at the end. Okay, glucose to pyruvate. We'll deal with what happens to the pyruvate in a minute. Okay, what's the rate limiting step in glycolysis? Phosphofructokinase, okay? It's limited by PFK. That's the slowest step, okay? In a more complex way, it's also probably somewhat limited by how much glucose we have available to go through and some of those things, okay? But this is the big thing here, okay? That's the big thing there. Now, what happens to the pyruvate?
It either becomes lactic acid or it goes into the Krebs cycle.
It can become lactic acid. What drives that? What enzyme drives pyruvate to lactic acid? Lactate dehydrogenase, so LDH. Okay. How can I change the activity of your lactate dehydrogenase? Some of you have a more active lactate dehydrogenase and will therefore turn more of any of the pyruvate you make into lactic acid than others. What is different about you guys? Fiber type, okay? Fiber type. Which fiber type has a more active LDH enzyme? Fast twitch, okay? Fast twitch fibers have a faster or more active LDH. So when a fast twitch fiber, for any molecule of glucose that gets broken down to pyruvate, there's a greater chance that it will be made into lactic acid. Okay? A greater chance. So in that particular way, fiber type has some control over maximal ability to generate energy in the aerobic pathways. Okay? It has some control. Okay, very good. This is not part of that particular homework or that particular question, but why is making lactic acid good and why is it bad? There's two sides of the coin. Why is it good?
Because we can use it as fuel as we're working out.
Okay, we can use the lactate as fuel. Yes. Good. One other reason. It's faster. Why is fast good? You can make energy quicker. Okay. It does one other really, really important thing. It's going to send something back to the pathway that we have to have in order for the pathway to be able to continue.
NAD.
That's right. Right. Going from pyruvate to lactic acid turns NADH back into NAD. We have to have free electron carriers or we can't convert glucose down into pyruvate. Okay? We have to have those. If we don't, it's not going to work. Or it's not going to be able to continue. Okay, good. Now, if it's not going to get made into lactic acid, where's the pyruvate going to go?
Krebs cycle.
Into the Krebs cycle. Good. What enzyme helps us put it into the Krebs cycle? PDH, pyruvate dehydrogenase. Okay. Pyruvate dehydrogenase. Very good. Okay. Once we're into Krebs, I'm going to move over here. From that pyruvate, what actually goes into the Krebs cycle? Very good. Okay. Acetyl-CoA goes in. What comes out? This is kind of a tricky one. This is going to get us to Anna's question. What comes out of the Krebs cycle?
NADH and PDH.
NADH, FADH, so electrons and CO2, good,
ATP.
and ATP. Okay. Now, I told you guys there is a rate limiting enzyme in the Krebs cycle. I'm not going to ask you about it. Okay. So what's the thing that's the rate limiting, that's really the rate limiter of the Krebs cycle? It's a little tricky. What really regulates how fast Krebs can go?
Level of ADP.
The level of ADP, okay, yes. That's technically correct. But the level of ADP controls the speed of something else that controls the speed of something going to the Krebs cycle.
It also controls the rate of creatine phosphate.
That's right. It controls there. Yes, that's good, Brittany. ADP controls, like, we need ADP to drive everything. But what do we need? What lets me get from here down to these things? I need electron carriers, right? If my, where are those electron carriers, where are they gonna come from? From the electron transport chain. So these NAD and FAD go to the electron transport chain, which then sends NAD and FAD back to the Krebs cycle. Okay? So the Krebs cycle can only go as fast as NAD and FAD can get returned from the electron transport chain. So in that particular way, realistically,
Electron transport chain is the reason.
yeah, the electron transport chain is the thing that regulates or limits the rate of the Krebs cycle. Okay? This can only go as fast as the electron transport chain will allow. So we'll do this to the nth degree. What goes into the electron transport chain? Okay. I'm just gonna say electrons, is that okay? So NADH, FADH go in, electrons go in, what comes out?
O2. Or
No, not O2.
No, H2, ATP.
ATP.
The ATP that they,
Mhm.
and then.
The electrons at the very end bind what? Oxygen. That oxygen, what follows the electrons onto the oxygen? You create this giant gradient of what ion?
Hydrogen.
Hydrogen. If you put hydrogen onto oxygen, what do we make? Water. ATP and water. Okay. And we didn't do the myokinase reaction. Didn't put myokinase on. How do we do the myokinase reaction? It should probably go down over here by the creatine phosphate, right? So how do we do it? What goes into myokinase? 2 molecules of ADP, 2. What comes out? 1 ATP and 1 AMP. Okay, so we're squishing 2 ADPs together and making an ATP. And its rate limiting step is the myokinase enzyme. Okay. All right. What else do we got?
What is the difference between like transient and actual hyper? I cannot talk this morning.
Transient and actual hypertrophy.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. I may have taken the slide out that has that on.
Yeah.
Not there? Okay. I'm sure none of you have ever done this, right? None of you have ever done this. But I bet you've seen somebody do this. Right? Let's say, right, we've all seen the Super Bro at the gym, right? Let's picture Super Bro in our mind.
I'm trying to, I have no idea what you mean.
Okay, Super Bro, right? T-shirt, like sleeves cut out all the way down to here, right? Shaker bottle, protein powder in it,
Literally almost like a football.
giant, yeah, giant Beats headphones, weight belt.
Almost every football player in high school.
I make no value judgments or no anything. Anyway, somebody goes, right? They're doing things. It also happens though, like I was doing some sit-ups, right? And they go, look in the mirror, strike a pose, pull the chin. It's happening. What are they looking for? Why do we do that? We probably all know. So why do we do that? And how does that relate to our question? I know what transient hypertrophy is? The pump, that's right. Transient hypertrophy is you increase force and metabolic rate inside of a muscle, and it drives water out of your blood and out of interstitial spaces into muscle fibers. And it makes them swell. Okay? That's what the pump is. That's transient hypertrophy. You go and you work out and you will have measurably larger muscles. Okay? But it's not because there's more protein, it's not because of any actual real long-term structural change. It's just that we've driven water in. And you wait about an hour and you let the pressure in the muscle recede back down to where it was. You let all of the metabolites that were accumulated from doing all of these metabolic processes here that drew water in as well. Everything equilibrates and people shrink right back down to whatever their regular normal size is. Okay? That's transient hypertrophy. Okay? It's real, but it's water. Same thing happens when you take creatine for a lot of people. You supplement creatine, you increase creatine phosphate inside the muscles, which can be good, and then water follows the creatine and you feel kind of like bloated in some ways. That was my experience of taking creatine. Okay? Water goes in, your muscles are bigger, but it's just water. You stop taking creatine, those levels go back down, the water leaves, and you kind of go back to your regular sort of state in that one. Okay? That's transient hypertrophy. Anyway.
But with creatine usage, well, with the increasing energy and being able to basically put more progressive load over those under muscles as it's getting stronger, like it does also lead to true hypertrophy.
It can, absolutely it can, yes. So the creatine sort of makes your muscles swell up with water, but it also lets you work out harder. So in some ways, creatine is really a training aid in some ways, in the same way that it's sort of ergogenic in that way, in the way that caffeine or something like a pre-workout is, rather than being purely anabolic in and of itself. Like the creatine itself does not drive protein synthesis, but it alters metabolism, which lets you work a little bit harder, which in and of itself then hopefully drives a larger protein synthesis response after. Yeah. Okay. But that is a potential side effect, right? Is that people will take creatine and then they get a little swelling. If you're a sprinter or you're an athlete that does those kinds of things, you may not actually want that water, that extra little bit of water weight may not be sort of what you're looking for. It may not be optimum for performance. in that way. Also, because of that, people take creatine, they exercise, do a lot of, we'll talk about heat stress later on. Taking creatine and then doing lots of outdoors exercise when it's really, really hot without adequate sort of fluid replacement, the creatine may slightly exacerbate your chances of sort of heat stress and things because you're drawing fluid out of the blood into the muscles where you kind of need. Okay. So that's transient versus, I don't know, what was the other chronic, whatever the other thing.
And just
Actual hypertrophy. Actual hypertrophy is more actin and myosin, it's protein synthesis driven.
yeah, doesn't,
Transient's just, pump.
isn't there something about like the myosin head getting bigger, so they're just being like this? When during actual hypertrophy, due to the increase of cross-sectional area?
Get more myosin heads, I don't know that any of
No,
them.
no, no, the myosin heavy chain gets.
Oh, the heavy chain,
Yeah.
it's heavier?
Or like weird.
No, you just get more myosin, you just have more myosin heads, so you can form more cross bridges. The myosin, myosin is just myosin, it all just looks the way that it looked. The heavy chain is not getting heavier, that I'm aware of, I don't think so. So. What else we got?
Want to know about inventory.
So what do I want you guys to know about mTOR? mTOR is key cellular pathway that needs to be activated to lead to muscle hypertrophy. That's what I want you to do. To get bigger muscles, you got to turn on mTOR. How we turn on mTOR, there's a little bit of, we have several kind of ways that we can do that. But that's the big thing is activate mTOR, get bigger muscles. That's kind of the central hub of those pathways.
But can you go a little bit, can you refresh us on myostatin?
Myostatin.
Yeah.
Sure. Myostatin is the opposite of mTOR. It's actually, functionally, it's the opposite. Okay. Increased myostatin limits muscle size. It limits gains in protein synthesis. Okay. Unlike things where myostatin is a receptor, it's not a cellular target. Myostatin is a protein. Okay. The more myostatin you have, relatively smaller muscles you might have overall, or a more blunted hypertrophic response you might have. If you have very little myostatin, you'll be jacked. Probably without ever having to do a whole lot, right?
If you should have like calories.
The bull, the Belgian blue bull. That bull is freaking swole, right? And y'all can Google, there's the myostatin deficient dogs and
I've seen
the Mighty Mouse, myostatin deficient mouse, and those kinds of things, yeah.
How do you, how do you?
What do you mean, how do you live?
Well, I know, like,
You just walk around and like, I am huge, what's up? I don't know, what do you mean, how do you live?
I just like.
How do you just live, you're there, right?
Yeah, I can imagine just be like, I don't know, Arnold Schwarzenegger literally all the time.
I don't know, right? You just like, here I am. Okay, there were questions, Olivia had a question, Olivia, you not have a question, so we'll go Olivia first.
Can you decrease your biostat?
Probably. I am sure that there are professional athletes that are taking things that likely can limit or reduce their biostat. I'm not aware of what they are, I promise you they're banned, right? But it would not surprise me, it's too key of a target for sort of drug companies and things to try to do all, to try to do things like that. So, but we can't just like Google something and like find it on Amazon, I'm sure that people try to do it. Okay,
You said for the lactic acid factor, like why is good as bad, why is the, like.
well, yeah, we did do the back, I'm sorry, we do this first, we didn't ever do, we did part of the good on glycolysis, we get some energy and it's fast. We can use the lactate as why is lactic acid pathway, why is glycolysis bad?
Makes our blood more acidic
Okay, yes, but why is that bad?
because it decreases enzyme activity.
Decreases enzyme activity, why is that bad?
But then yeah.
Why is fatigue bad? You can't produce force, so you gotta stop, right? Making lactic acid increases the blood acidity, it increases intracellular acidity, which inhibits glycolysis. It inhibits the electron transport chain. It inhibits calcium release, it inhibits calcium binding to troponin. It shuts down our ability to make energy and to generate force. All of which means we have to stop, okay, or slow down when we exercise. That's why it's bad. So it's a balancing act, right? It's a balancing act. Good with the best. Okay. I think that got to Olivia's. You were gonna ask what's good about the Krebs cycle? Okay. What's good about the Krebs cycle? Is the Krebs cycle good? Is it bad? Pardon? It's aerobic. Is that good or bad? Good for long term. Why? I agree with you, but why?
A lot of ATP
It makes a lot of ATP.
compared to just the two pathway,
Okay?
but it takes a long time to actually get to the point that it starts making that amount.
Correct. Now, to be the most technically precise, we don't actually purely make a lot of energy in the Krebs cycle. We make a little bit, right? We make 1 GTP molecule per turn. So we actually kind of net 2 ATP directly out of Krebs, just like glycolysis. But all of these electrons that we're carrying from down here at the end can lead to a huge amount of energy, right? Krebs is good because we get stuff that lets us make a lot of energy. That's good. The downside of Krebs is it's slow, okay? Or at least it can be, you gotta get to pyruvate first, then you gotta get all the way through here, then you gotta get the electrons over to the electron transport chain, and then we can finally make some ATP. And oh yeah, then we gotta get that ATP and get it out of the mitochondria into the rest of the cell where we're actually going to use it, okay? So it's a slower process. And during certain kinds of exercise, in some situations, that can be limited. The speed of it can be limited. Okay. What's good about creatine phosphate? Fast. Good. What's bad? It's too fast. Okay.
It's like one, but like you can't rely on.
Why can't we rely on it for a long period of time? Lots of side comments, which is great. Why? Why does it not last very long?
20 ATP, like that at the end, and it produces a lot of lactic
We'll get no lactic acid out of creatine phosphate. That's okay. We are only getting one ATP.
Is it just because we have like a small amount of like creatine?
Yes. There's a limited finite amount of it. Okay? It doesn't make that much energy, and we have a limited amount, but it's really fast. Okay? So that's the downside. You don't even have enough to be able to sprint 200 meters without slowing down. Right? If you look at the splits of the NCAA indoor track and field championship was this past weekend. Right? They run 200 indoors.
Yeah, the indoor championship at the 200-meter track.
It's 200. So you run one lap. Okay. If you watch the splits, it's a little easier to see outdoors. So you don't get to make one turn rather than four, basically. But they run one turn. If you run the splits, the first 100, if they're really going all out, is usually faster than the second 100. You shouldn't be able to do that. If you're armed and you're not going as hard as you can in the first 100.
Usually the first 100, like you'll see them run like 9 seconds almost flat typically, but then usually the second is about like 11.
Yeah, they slow down because they run out of creatine phosphate. Okay. So, all right. Well, you had a question. Sorry.
I was gonna ask. About adaptations and then Kind of give it again.
What'd you come up with? You gave me an example.
For the first part of the time, I just started like messing overload and that it doesn't matter how much. But it's like harder to like get.
That's great. That's great. 100% right. When we do progressive overload, this is a really key point that I may not have emphasized enough. What's the actual, so you progressively overload. What's the actual like cellular stimulus? What's the thing we're trying to get? Stretching of the sarcolemma, good. And one other thing. It's really, really important. Okay, failure, yes. Failure helps us maximize the stretch, and then what's the other really, really key thing? It's a little counterintuitive because we talked about this, it didn't really matter how much weight that you lifted, as long as you went to failure. But what's the other key thing? I need to stretch the sarcolemma, and I need to.
What are you?
That helps me get there, yes. Load. Load and stretch. Force production and stretch causes disruption in the sarcolemma. And that mechanical disruption, it is easier to achieve if we lift heavier weights, right? And we're doing eccentrics on top of it. Load and stretch seem to be the primary thing that stimulate. That's the acute signal that activates the mTOR pathway. It activates, or it helps us activate the release of testosterone and growth hormone and IGF-1. It helps us to upregulate those receptors, which leads to those things. Okay. So that's the acute thing. You gotta load a muscle, you gotta stretch a muscle. So you need to lift to failure. The load, the absolute load doesn't matter that much, but you need to get to failure, which seems to be the thing. Something about that means we've really gotten it with a lot of load. For most people, then the easiest way to do that is to lift something that's pretty heavy. But you don't have to. Huh? You don't have to.
Isn't like the other way, other than just lifting like as heavy as you can, like lifting a certain weight times that you can?
Absolutely. Absolutely. As many times as you. That's gonna get us to failure. Okay? So that's the easiest way to do that. Have I told you guys about a study that we had to do when I was a PhD student, where we did we mimicked space flight for a month in people? What would you all let us do to you from a research perspective if I paid you all $1,000?
In zero gravity.
No, here.
Oh,
And we're not gonna send you to space.
well, like, yeah, but like simulate.
Yes, we're gonna simulate the effects of space flight. So we had the drug company that shall remain nameless, that funded us to do a thing. They had a drug in an animal model. This is how drugs work. You start off in like single cells, and then you progress to animal models. And there's a huge number of things that work in isolated muscle cells. There's a smaller amount, but still quite a bit that work in animal models, and you have to try to translate it into human trials to see if it's actually going to work. They had a drug in animals that prevented disuse muscle atrophy. Okay, which essentially meant they could stop sarcopenia from happening. Like age-related, when we get older and our muscles shrink, like they had a drug that they thought would prevent muscles from getting smaller. Okay. Now, in an animal, if you want to simulate space flight, they tie the tail up on a little thing in the cage. And the rats, the mice, they walk around with it on the front arms, on the front legs, and their back legs hang up in the air. And they can move, but they don't bear any weight. That's like space. That's the animal unloading model. Okay. So animals are a little pissed, but you know, it's better than some of the alternatives that we can do. In humans, we did this 6-inch platform on one chute, crutches, and you just crutch around like this. And so your one leg just would swing free for a month. You sit down, prop your leg up. Get up in the middle of the night, you gotta go pee, you gotta hop. Okay? We basically took people for a month and they put no weight on one leg. Quad got about 12% smaller in a month. Their calf got about 16% smaller in a month. So we didn't get to give the drug to anybody. As far as the drug obviously didn't work because it didn't work in humans. It's not on the market. We were just helping them to try to figure out if they could get enough atrophy in a month, and how long they needed to have people go. So anyway, the drug, my guess is that the drug sort of kept mTOR active in some ways, in the midst of all of that, or it blocked one of the degradation pathways. So there you have it.
So basically you had people have pretend broken limb.
For a month, for $1,000. Every person was like, never again.
I was about to say,
They're like, it's not enough money, I'm not doing it.
I was about to say, I probably wouldn't, for a month, I probably wouldn't do it for 1,000. 10,000, that's actually a little more reasonable. And I'm speaking of it like badly, like especially as a runner, if I had to go without using one of my legs for a month, I will literally lose my mind. Heck, I lost my mind in rehab.
Okay, other questions, more questions, what else we got? Yes, sir.
Could you explain, the idea of protein balance and what exactly, like how you get into a positive protein balance?
Sure. So my favorite analogy for this, I always run back to the thing. So my dad, the high school football coach, with his lovely motivational things would say, you're either gonna get better today, or you're gonna get worse today. Right? Never gonna say the same. That's what's happening with your muscles. Your muscles right now, as you sit there, are either getting bigger or they're getting smaller. Okay? They're never staying the same, or they're very rarely staying the same. Okay? And so that's the idea of protein balance. In a given muscle, it's either synthesizing new protein or there's protein degradation in that muscle that's going on. And that sort of fluctuates throughout the day, fluctuates day to day and week to week. The idea of a positive protein balance means that over a week, a month, several months, that protein synthesis making new protein happens more than protein degradation. So you're in a positive balance. You tip things towards more synthesis than breakdown, which then over time will lead to a gain in muscle. Okay, a gain in muscle. So how do you stimulate things to be in a positive protein balance? That's pretty simple, right? You got to make sure you're eating an adequate amount of protein, which most of you do, okay? And you need to do resistance training. Or take steroids, either one, right? But you need to resistance training, okay? Resistance training drives upregulation of mTOR, it drives protein synthesis. Eating protein also drives protein synthesis. Eating protein also blocks protein breakdown. Okay, it also blocks protein breakdown. It is difficult to gain muscle mass if you're also not in a positive caloric balance. It doesn't have to be a lot, okay? But if you are attempting, right, if you're attempting to lose weight or you're attempting to lose body fat and you're eating fewer calories than you need in a given day, it is difficult to do that while also increasing muscle size. Because what happens is I don't have enough calories today. I want to break down fat, but I also want to break down muscle because there's lots of energy stored in that. So in a lot of ways, the best we can do when you're trying to lose weight is to maintain muscle while losing weight and adipose tissue. It's kind of hard to do together. And that's why bodybuilders will just dirty bulk and they just get big, eat a bunch, right? Huge positive caloric balance, put on lots of weight, and then they try to cut from there, which is wildly unhealthy, but that's beside the point. That's why they do it. Did I answer your question? I'm not even sure that I answered your question. I'm just talking.
Yes.
Okay. How much stronger can you get?
In resistance training,
Yes.
25 to 100%.
Okay. How much bigger can you get?
20, like 5 to 40%.
Okay. Why are those numbers different? Why are they not identical? What does that tell us about what it is that adapts in a muscle?
You have more neurological adaptation than you do like physiological adaptation, or sorry, not physiological.
Okay. So I get a neurological adaptation and I get contractile protein adaptation. What's a neurological adaptation?
More higher frequency and more motor unit recruitment.
What am I better at? In very layman's terms, what am I better at?
Producing force.
Producing force, yes. Recruiting, right? I can turn on the fibers that I have better. Okay? That's why those two things are different. It tells us that muscle size is not the only thing that contributes to force production. Okay? It's not the only thing. To maximize neurological adaptations, you need to lift very heavy. Okay? We need to lift a very heavy weight to maximize neurological adaptation. As you get better at whatever it is that you're practicing, whatever it is that you're doing. So to be better at recruiting and activating fibers so you can generate lots of force, you have to try and generate lots of force. You need failure to get hypertrophy. You need to lift heavy to get really, really strong. Okay? You're now smarter than every Instagram fitness person that there is. 2 sentences, that's it. Your friend says, what do you want to do? That's it. Okay? Okay. What else we got?
What about, like, which, knows,
Absolutely, I can. Thinking about this for days. Which maybe, says some things about me.
You're thinking about exercise a lot.
I do think about exercise a lot, but I've been thinking about how my bathtub analogy was not the best. And I've been stuck at home with a sick kid, so. Okay. We're gonna get to Lindy's question in a minute, but I'm gonna start by doing something else. Okay? And just bear with me, we're gonna get there. Okay. On this side of the board, I'm gonna draw, okay, energy demand. Okay, energy demand. So when you're at rest, you need this much energy. Okay, this much energy. When you're walking, you need this much, right? More. When you're jogging, you need more still. Okay? But I'm not tall enough. But let's say you're doing a sprint or some kind of all-out thing. You need that much energy. Okay? Does that part make sense to you guys? Okay. Now, the purpose of metabolism is we need enough ATP to fill up these bars. Okay? Does not matter where the ATP comes from. Doesn't matter where it comes from. Okay? All that matters is when I'm resting, I need this much energy to stay alive and breathe and make my heart beat and digest food and keep my brain functioning. When I'm jogging, it goes up, right? When I'm walking, it goes up a little bit less. When I'm sprinting, it goes away. Okay. Now, let's look over here, okay? On this side, let's just say, and I apologize, it's going to be hard for me to draw these things exactly to scale, but let's just say that I have, in an absolute sense, this much energy available to me from creatine phosphate, okay? From creatine phosphate. I have some smaller amount available to me from the myokinase reaction. I have more from glycolysis, okay? And we're going to come back to this in a second. And then I have, and this is completely not the scale, because the aerobic in theory would be even way, way, way bigger, okay? But this will work for our purposes. I have some capacity, right, from aerobic metabolism that's even bigger than all of this, okay? Now, the problem that we have is glycolysis and aerobic metabolism. Let's imagine that what I have drawn is the most that we can get from those. At its absolute fastest, everything is going. I can get this much energy from glycolysis. I can get this much energy from my aerobic pathways. Okay? The problem is that while y'all are sitting there right now at rest, we are not anywhere close to getting as much energy as we can from, we're nowhere close to maxing those things out. So right, like at rest, before it gets all sped up and turned on, we're getting that much energy from aerobic metabolism. Okay, and then let's just say we're getting like that much from glycolysis. Okay, a little bit of glycolysis, that much aerobic metabolism. So when we come over here and we look at energy demand, I'm resting. I need X amount of energy, okay? This much energy is less than what I can provide from aerobic metabolism when it's going its slowest, okay? So see how this is roughly the same size or a little bit bigger than this, okay? I can, and for most of you, this is very true. At rest, it's very easy to meet your energy demand through aerobic metabolism and just a little bit of glycolysis, not enough glycolysis to make enough lactic acid for it to matter. Okay. When I start walking, when I go from rest to walking, okay, let's imagine that right when I start, I get this much energy from aerobic metabolism, but there's still some more that I need right when I start walking. So how am I going to get, where is that bit of energy going to come from? Some of it can come from glycolysis. What if what I get from glycolysis is not enough? Creatine phosphate. So when I start walking, I've got the aerobic metabolism that was going at rest, okay? But I immediately have this, what we're going to call, and this is part of the stuff we would cover in the next lecture. I immediately have this additional need for ATP that cannot be met by aerobic metabolism. So I've got to fill in that gap from somewhere. And if it can't all be met from what I'm getting from glycolysis, then I will start using creatine phosphate. Okay. Now imagine that this walk continues. It continues on at that pace for some period of time. Okay. As we progress over time, aerobic metabolism speeds up. More pyruvate comes through glycolysis. We activate the electron transport chain. We activate the things in the Krebs cycle. We activate the PDH enzyme better. So you can clearly see that from aerobic metabolism, my bar is big enough that if I give it enough time, I can meet the entirety of what I need from walking from aerobic metabolism. But it's not going to be an immediate thing. It's going to take a couple of minutes for that to be the case. So in that couple of minutes, you can imagine that this level is going to start to tick itself up, okay? So I'm using glycolysis, I'm using creatine phosphate to make up that gap between what aerobic can provide and what I actually need to move, okay? And the hope is just that the gap is small enough and that I'm not going to go so long that aerobic can catch up before all of the things that, from an anaerobic standpoint that we're using are either depleted or that we make so much lactic acid that it inhibits everything. Does that make sense, guys? Now, let's think about I'm going to jog, right? It's the same thing, but when I start, you go from resting, I start jogging, I'm right here. That gap between what aerobic provides and what I need immediately is even bigger. So I'm going to have to use more creatine phosphate. I'm going to have to use more from glycolysis at the onset of jogging. So that also means that if this gets to be too high, I may run out of an ability to fill that gap in before aerobic catches up. For most of us, jogging-wise, we're going to be okay. But when I go to do a sprint, it's really, really big. And so one of the reasons that we can't sprint at high intensities for very long is that the energy demand is so high, that gap is so big that we deplete our creatine phosphate, we end up making a lot of lactic acid before aerobic metabolism can catch up. And if you go fast enough, there may even be some instances where all aerobic can do is this, and there's always going to be a gap between what you need. And so once all of the creatine phosphate is gone, you can maybe make up for that with glycolysis for a little bit, and that sets that upper limit on what we're able to actually do. Okay? And that's how these things all are going to work together. You have a certain demand, and you have to meet it. And because there's this lag of speed in aerobic metabolism and in glycolysis, we're going to have to use creatine phosphate and to a smaller extent a myokinase reaction to try to make up that gap until our aerobic pathway can get sped up and do those things. Okay. Now, here's a fun trick. Okay. What if what I want to do is I need to jog because I'm doing a marathon or some kind of long distance thing, or I got to do something that's kind of in between a jog and a sprint. What I don't want is to start the race with my aerobic metabolism basically firing like we're at rest. So what do? I warm up. Okay? Lots of things that people do during warm-ups, I think are not necessarily that effective. Like stretching, it's fine. Whatever.
Even dynamic stretching?
It's fine. Whatever. Do you run a lot doing this? No. I mean, it's fine. It's fine. But the biggest thing that we do with the warm-up, right, is I jog some and I stimulate the aerobic pathways and they speed up and they stay elevated for a while. Okay? So what you want to do then when you're warming up is, I don't want to start here. I want to start with it way up here, as close to that as I can, so I can maximize the amount of energy I'm getting from aerobic right at the get-go. Which then means that I don't have to borrow as much from creatine phosphate. I don't have to do as much glycolysis initially. So that then I can do this very high intensity thing for a longer period of time, because what I'm doing requires, I can only go as long as I have extra creatine phosphate. I can only go as long as I can keep glycolysis going. And that's a finite amount of time. So we can maximize that by this nice kind of warm-up. Okay. Is that better than the bathtub? Yeah. I have no idea if I actually answered the question that you asked. I just went off on this tangent. So what was the actual question?
I think that one is that. If you give like an example, like,
Yes.
is there anyone who's having a solid in the grass?
Okay. So predominant energy pathways. Okay. Predominant energy pathways. Think of it like this. Okay. Think of it like this. Things that are short, high intensity. Right? It's very easy. I'm going to sprint for 10 seconds. It's this. Think about that. The predominant pathway is like anaerobic, because the top part of my bar is going to be that much bigger than what aerobic can provide. Okay? So short term, high intensity tend to be anaerobic energy predominant. They tend to be creatine phosphate dominant. Okay. When you get into things that are kind of in the middle, okay, high intensity, as hard as you can go for, say, a minute, right? A minute. You're a pretty decent junior high 400 meter run. About 60 seconds to run 400 meters. Okay. You're pretty decent. That's probably going to be a very glycolytic heavy process. Because you've gone long enough that you've used up all of your creatine phosphate, but it's too short for aerobic to be able to catch up. It's very high intensity, so it's probably glycogen. Okay. Anything that lasts longer than about 4 or 5 minutes, it's aerobic metabolism. If it's constant, okay, it's aerobic. Anything more than that. Where things get confusing is like, well, what about a basketball game? Or a soccer match? Or a volleyball? Or football? Well, they last a long time, but they're very what we call intermittent. It's very stop, start, stop, start, stop, start, right? It's very high intensity for a short period of time, rest. High intensity, rest. High intensity, rest. Those kinds of sports, even soccer, where it's sprint, walk, jog, sprint, walk, stop. Somebody falls down because like they're injured. I love soccer. That is the worst. Okay. They tend to be very anaerobic kinds of sport. Okay. Very anaerobic. Because the actual skills and things that you have to do during the game are very high intensity for very short periods. So those would be some examples. I'll make things confusing for you.
Oh, boy.
Think about this stuff. You're going to walk for 10 seconds. What's the predominant energy?
You're going to walk for 10 seconds?
Walking for 10 seconds. Resting to walking across the stage. Nice. It could be creatine phosphate, right?
Yeah.
It's short. It all depends on where my resting aerobic metabolism is, how well trained, like, and how fast I'm walking. Okay? Could be that. What if I'm walking a minute? It's probably aerobic.
Yeah.
Probably aerobic. Okay? If anyone says walking generally walking is an aerobic kind of thing unless you're wildly untrained. Okay, or you're like walking upstairs or something like that, where it requires long. But that's how I would make that tricky, right? So I say something like that. It's a very low intensity activity, but you're doing it for a very short period of time. Probably still, it's low intensity, it's going to generally be aerobic. It's high intensity, probably going to be. We've got a couple more minutes.
All the stuff is on at the rest, it's really $1.
Yep. All the pathways are on at rest. We have no way other than like inhibiting them with hydrogen ion. We have no way to turn them off, right? There is ADP floating around in your body. When it bumps into creatine phosphate, it will drive that reaction. It's just at rest that ADP levels are much, much lower, so the chances of that happening are small. I haven't even shown you guys. Who's had biochemistry? Anybody? Okay. You guys remember there's a thing, it's called a Michaelis-Menten plot for plotting enzyme kinetics? All of metabolism, all of training, we'll talk about this when we increase mitochondria. All of training was driven by, your metabolism is driven entirely by Michaelis-Menten plots and those things. You increase the number of enzymes that are present, or you increase the amount of pyruvate that is present, you double the chances of a reaction happening. The reaction doesn't speed up, but you get more chances of it become more likely to happen. So it's some wild stuff. It's very fun. Or terrible. All of us. Okay. What else? Appreciate the honest feedback on the assessments. Okay. The number of you that were like, I hate class at 8 o'clock in the morning. I know, I get it. I do, I get it. No one said my PowerPoints were sad. There were some comments on the PowerPoints that were well received. They were. right? Some of the graphs need more explanations than some other things. I'm just gonna, I get it, it's well received. One for they were sad. That made me happy. Maybe they are sad. I don't see. All right, anything else, guys? Okay, test Wednesday. Just like the last one, there will be multiple choice. The format will be the same. There will be short answers. I'll pick some from the things that are on the list, all right? I'll try to get here 15 minutes early or thereabouts. You guys can go ahead and get started and have a little bit more. Are we doing? Meeting. There will be no Zoom review session. If you have questions, I should be around tomorrow. I gotta go pretty much sick this afternoon, so you can call me or text me, it'll be fine. Tomorrow? But I'm around. Good deal.